Joshua. Then Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem, and summoned the elders, the heads, the judges, and the officers of Israel. And they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said to all the people, "Now therefore revere the Lord, and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your ancestors served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. Now if you are unwilling to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served in the region beyond the rivers, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." Then the people answered, "Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For it is the Lord our God who brought us and our ancestors up from the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And who did those great signs in our sight? He protected us along all the way that we went, and among all the peoples through whom we passed. And the Lord drove out before us all the peoples, the Amorites who lived in the land. Therefore we also will serve the Lord, for he is our God." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Please be seated. Our first reading comes from the prophet, the leader of Joshua, the 24th chapter, which is the very last chapter of the book of Joshua. And if you've ever read the book of Joshua, you cannot wait for the 24th chapter to come around. There has been nothing but killing and beating and just all kinds of pillaging going on in the 24th chapter, or through the book of Joshua. They finally arrive at the promised land, and the promise turns out to be a little harder than they imagined. They have to go and take it away from its rightful owners. Well, today we would call it their rightful owners, but back then, God said it was theirs, so go kill everybody and it can be yours. And so, after many, many murders and battles and all kinds of treachery, the land of Canaan is finally in the hands of the Israelites. And Joshua calls them to Shechem and says to them, "It's time for you to decide. Who will you serve?" Back then, wherever there was a national boundary, that's where your God's influence ended. So, the gods of Egypt, their power ended where Egypt ended. In the land of Canaan, their God's power ended at its boundary. It's just like if you went to Canada, there would be another God. Our God in the United States would end, and the power of the Canadian God would be the one in charge. And you'd have to say a hoot instead of about. Hey, right? I mean, God up there probably says hey, and likes hockey. And so that's the way it was back then. And Joshua says it's time for you all to decide. And if you look at the reading this morning, it said, you don't have to look at the reading, just at the introduction there, where it shows you what verses we read. We read verse 1, half of verse 2, then we skip all the way to verse 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. It leaves out most of the 24th chapter of Joshua. These are Joshua's departing remarks. After he recounts in those verses that we do not read today, the entire history of the people of Israel, he says to them, "Who are you going to serve?" They say, "The God of our ancestors, of Abraham, Isaac, and all that." And so he says, "Do you really want to do that? Because your God's a jealous God. And if you really don't want to serve this God, speak now or forever hold your peace." And they said, "Oh no, Joshua, this is who we want." And so at Shechem, there's this big stone placed, and there's a religious ceremony, and everybody swears their allegiance to God. And then, right after that, it says, "After these things, Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. They buried him in his own inheritance in Timnath-Serah, which is in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. So he leaves a legacy to the people of Israel, saying, this is the story of the people of God. How God has been faithful to you. How we have tried to be faithful to God. We failed a few times. We succeeded a few times. And now it's up to you. Who will you choose to serve? And immediately following the book of Joshua, after he dies, they start having judges. So there are no more big people like Moses and Joshua in the Old Testament to lead the people of Israel. And so Joshua must implore the people to remember their history, to remember their faith, and to swear allegiance to God, and to live that faith out the rest of their lives. Of course, we know it doesn't happen. But we have to remember also that this book of Joshua was edited a few hundred years later. After the people were in Babylon, they had what happened to them happened to the land of Canaan. And so the Babylonians hauled them off to Babylon. And so they look back in the book of Joshua and say, oh, well, we didn't do this. We didn't follow that. Oh my goodness. I can't believe we sinned like that. No wonder we're in exile. If we had only listened to Joshua, we wouldn't be in such trouble. So where am I really going with this morning? I asked the people at 8 o'clock the same question I'm going to ask you. I hope we do not have the same reaction. At 8 o'clock I said, are you ready to die? Dorothy Ashton immediately had a diabetic problem. Her sugar was 24. The service stopped. The ambulance showed up, and she put an exclamation point right at the end of my sermon. If any of you feel like dying right now, please, the doors are right out there. But seriously, you know, I was with 3 people who died this week. At University of Maryland Hospital, when my wife was there, I usually leave from here, so I've got my collar on, and they know me to be a priest. And so 2 people with shock trauma had died, or were dying, and they asked me to go do last rites, and so I did. And then, I don't know how many of you know this now, but my old Dembeck passed away last night at 9:30. And so, this has been a god-awful week. And what I heard from all 3 families was, we never discussed this. We never planned for this. Now, don't get me wrong. Viola would have been 94 in November. And I'm not criticizing her or Andy. But it's a conversation we need to have. You know, and I'm not talking about to whom will I leave this ring? Or to whom do I leave my house and my minuscule bank account? But what is my legacy? What is my legacy?